Today, we're cracking open a truly monumental book, The Grand Chessboard. It was written by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was not only President Carter's national security advisor, but was widely seen as one of America's sharpest strategic minds. Think of this book less as a history lesson and more as a high-level playbook for how a global superpower can stay on top in the modern world. And really, the whole book boils down to one massive question. In this incredibly high-stakes game of global politics, once you've made it to the top, how on earth do you stay there? For Brzezinski, the world isn't really a global community. It's a strategic competition. It's basically a giant game of chess. And this quote, well, it just nails the core of his entire argument. Brzezinski says, forget everything else for a moment, because there's really only one board that truly matters, Eurasia. You know, for the last 500 years, this colossal landmass, stretching all the way from Europe to the far east of Asia, has been the absolute center of world power. So the logic is simple. If you want to influence the world, you first have to control this chessboard. Okay, so why Eurasia? What's the big deal about this one part of the world? Brzezinski's whole case really rests on three simple, but incredibly powerful facts. First off, it's about people. A mind-boggling 75% of the world's entire population lives on the Eurasian continent. It's where humanity is. It's where the big historical shifts happen. You just can't argue with that kind of demographic weight. Second, you've got the money. About 60% of the world's total economic output, its gross national product, is generated right here. That means most of the planet's actual physical wealth, from the biggest factories to the most important financial hubs, is all concentrated on this single landmass. And third, and this is a huge one, resources. Roughly 3/4 of all the known energy reserves on the planet are located under Eurasian soil. So you combine the people, the wealth, and the energy, and you can really start to see why Brzezinski calls it the ultimate geopolitical prize. So the board is set. Now let's talk about the main player in this game. According to Brzezinski, the United States is what he calls a hegemon of a new type, a kind of global power that the world has, frankly, never seen before. So what makes it so different? Well, for one, it's speed. Think about the Romans. They took centuries to build their empire. America's rise to global supremacy was lightning fast in comparison. And its power isn't just military might. It's this unique blend of military reach, economic muscle, technological leadership, and maybe most importantly, cultural influence. And here's the key. America doesn't typically rule by just conquering people. Instead, it's built this incredibly complex global system. You have military alliances like NATO, financial pillars like the IMF and the World Bank, and the powerful appeal of its democratic ideals. It all creates what you could call a consensual kind of dominance, where Washington is at the center, but decisions are often made through cooperation and agreement. Okay, so it's not enough to just know the board and the most powerful player. To win the game, you have to understand all the other pieces. And Brzezinski breaks them down into two really important categories: geostrategic players and geopolitical pivots. First up, let's talk about the players. You can think of these as the active, powerful pieces on the board. Your rooks, your knights, your bishops. These are the states that have both the power and the ambition to make big moves and actually change the state of the game. And at the time of writing, Brzezinski pointed to these five as the key players on that Eurasian board. You've got France and Germany driving the project of united Europe. You've got Russia trying to figure out its new role after the Soviet Union. And, of course, the two rising giants in Asia, China and India. These are the countries that America has to constantly watch, manage, and balance. All right, next we have the pivots. Now, these are different. Unlike the players, these countries aren't necessarily powerful in their own right. Instead, they're like critically important squares on the chessboard. Their importance comes from where they are, a sensitive location that makes them a potential flashpoint between the bigger players. And here are five that Brzezinski highlights. Their value isn't in their own military or economic strength, but in what they control access to. Think about it. Azerbaijan's control over energy in the Caspian Sea can either help or hinder Russia. Turkey and Iran are literally gateways to the Middle East and Central Asia. A pivot's alignment can either give a big player a huge advantage or completely deny that advantage to a rival. So you can see why protecting these pivots is just so important. And if you want to understand just how incredibly critical a single pivot can be, you only have to look at this famous and, as we've seen, almost prophetic quote about Ukraine. He argued that Ukraine's independence doesn't just change Ukraine, it fundamentally transforms what Russia can even hope to be. And this breaks it down perfectly. Brzezinski said that if Russia ever regained control over Ukraine with its huge population, its resources, and its critical access to the Black Sea, it would automatically have the tools to once again become a massive Eurasian empire. But without Ukraine, Russia is sort of pushed to the east, becoming a more Asian power, and potentially getting bogged down in conflicts on its southern borders. You see? Ukraine is the catalyst. So, knowing the board, the player, and all the key pieces, what's the winning strategy for the United States? Well, Brzezinski lays out a very clear set of what he calls geostrategic imperatives. The whole strategy really boils down to two core moves. First, you have to truly understand the big players. What do they want? What are their ambitions? And second, you have to identify and protect those vulnerable pivots, making sure they stay stable so that no single player can use them to dominate a region. It's a constant, delicate balancing act. And what's the whole point of that balancing act? It's this. This is the #1 goal. America's primary objective has to be maintaining what Brzezinski calls geopolitical pluralism. In plain English, that just means making sure no single country or alliance of countries gets powerful enough on the Eurasian continent to challenge America's global position. But, okay, what's the endgame here? Is the goal for America to just rule the world forever? Interestingly, Brzezinski says no. He argues that American dominance isn't the final goal in itself, but actually a temporary phase, a means to a much bigger, much more ambitious end. The real, ultimate goal is for America to use its unique moment of power to build something that lasts, to create a stable, cooperative global security system that can endure long after America is no longer the world's sole superpower. The long-term vision is a transition from being the world's policeman to being its leader and anchor within a much more balanced, institutionalized global community. And all of this leaves us with a really provocative question for today. This book was a product of its time, that brief moment right after the Cold War when America's power seemed absolute. But today, the board looks very different. We have the incredible rise of China, new global challenges like climate change, cyber warfare, things Brzezinski barely touched on. Some critics even say the book is an amazing example of a perspective that was revised without actually being rethought. So the question is, are we even playing the same game anymore? And do the old rules of the Grand Chessboard still apply? That's something for all of us to think about.